Live again on Facebook here. Saturday, 1 p.m. I like doing these things. They give me a purpose. And I enjoy sharing what I know. I have enthusiasm for helping other people. So, this is good. Tomorrow's Mother's Day. So, that's why I'm doing it today on Saturday instead of tomorrow. Tomorrow is a day to be with my family. So, looking forward to that. Get to spend some time with my wife and her family and my mom. So, looking forward to that. Had baseball this morning. My son had his practice. We flip-flop. Usually the game is on the weekend, but because of a lot of the Holy Communions that are happening, we decided to play the game yesterday. So today was practice. Now I'm here at the office. I'll do this live here in a minute. I'm going to chill here for a little bit, get a little work done. And, yeah, so. Today's topic is going to be on P.I.E.R.S. It's like a framework that I use that helps me when I am trying to talk to people or deliver a message, work with clients. So P.I.E.R.S is P.I.E.R.S. And basically that breaks down into all these needs that we have as human beings. I mean, there's no getting around it. We have needs that need to be met, especially through all the developmental stages of our childhood. So I'm going to talk a little bit about attachment. Maybe some of you have heard about attachment styles. You know, the anxious attachment, avoidant attachment. It's important to know, especially when dealing with substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and complex trauma, as I think that is the extra layer of healing that needs to happen, even with sobriety taking place. Is still going back into the childhood and doing that work. So yeah, then we have the secure attachment, right? That's the healthy attachment. But the P.I.E.R.S, P.I.E.R.S stands for physical, intellectual, emotional, relational, and spiritual needs. And these are core areas of our human need. You know, hopefully they're getting met. That's why it's such an importance that parents are healthy and that parents understand this so that they can then pass this off to their children. Because children, naturally, they're born with needs. The question is, were those needs met? And how were those needs modeled for you? Or were any of these needs not met? And because we're not perfect as parents, the good thing to keep in mind as I go through this talk is consistency. All right, being consistent with how we show up as a parent. And that's why healing work is so important. Because the more invested we are with our own healing, the more consistent we can be in how we show up. You know, think of it like if you have a toddler and they want to go down the slide. Maybe it's the first time, maybe not. But you sense their nervousness, their fear. And they want to make sure that you're going to be at the bottom of the slide to catch them, just in case. And let's say as a parent, out of the 10 times the child goes down the slide, you catch them 5 times. Now again, depending on the child, could be an issue. Right? That child remembers the 5 times that they fell off the slide, that you didn't catch them. Maybe even if they landed on both feet. But they still remember you not being there. So it's significant. As parents, we don't realize how significant we are to our children in this type of way. We look at the 5 times we were there catching them off the slide, and we think, hey, we're doing a great job. So when even the kid says, how come you weren't there for the 6th or 7th time, we might get defensive. What about the 5 times? Look at all I do for you. I can't do everything all the time. Instead of allowing that kid to be upset with us, which is totally allowed. Children are allowed to be upset with their parents. It's up to us as the adults to be able to handle that. Again, this is why working with somebody and healing is so important. So let's dive in to our physical needs. I'll start with the first letter of my P.I.E.R.S framework. And just to be mindful, please be careful not to shame yourself for the ways that you learn to survive, because I'm going to make you make sense of some of the ways that you behave. Maybe you don't like right now or you don't agree with, but we're going to make some sense out of it. A lot of these patterns developed in your life for a reason. So some of the things you don't like about yourself, some of the things that you try to avoid, some of the things that maybe you're ashamed about, we're going to talk a little bit about, help you make some sense out of it. It's not to give ourselves a free pass and just say, well, this is the way I am. This is why, I hurt others. But it is to become aware so that then we could do something about it. So I am big on complex trauma. I'm going to discuss that a little bit in the talk. I don't think everything is trauma. Okay, so for some of you out there that are, might have a part that's like, well, here we go with the trauma talk and everybody has trauma now. I understand. I get it. But think of it this way. Repeated stress and unmet needs absolutely shape us. And just because we become an adult or get older doesn't mean that those needs never needed to be addressed and still don't need to be addressed. Part of the healing work I do is called reparenting. Basically, and some of you have seen some of my videos or photos where I post myself at different ages of my childhood. And I give myself those needs that maybe I didn't get in certain moments of my life that I carried alone. And reparenting is allowing myself to step into that as the adult version of me and give that wounded younger version of me some love and some compassion, some understanding, and meet some of the needs. So physical needs, a child should have received safety, right? Physical safety in the home, protection, a calm environment, affection, right? A lot of physical touch, and just a predictable environment. So a child at such a young age, an infant, going into the toddler, developmental stages, right? They're trying to build that attachment. And depending on parents, usually the mom, is going to play a part in that attachment style of that young infant. Obviously dad plays a part in the amount of stress mom carries as well. So good to keep in mind. No matter what it is we're doing or going through as the adult, it's still our responsibility to try to make sure it's not filtering out onto our children. And that's not to say that we're going to avoid things. It's just to be aware that our children are looking for safety from us. And that's going to help them. You know, think about babies born into this world. They're in survival mode. They're 100% dependent. I mean, I don't know about you, but you ever think about that? How scary that is? Like, that's terrifying. Especially if you have parents that don't know this stuff, that are dysfunctional, that there's a lot of other things going on in the home. It just makes it that much more scarier. And, you know, this is why I'll hit on survival mode or survival patterns. Because of not being able to securely attach, you had to develop ways as a kid to get your needs met, to figure a way out through your childhood. And that's why it makes sense. The problem is it has its way of boomeranging itself back on us, especially when we have our own marriage and our own children. That's where we see it the most because, right, that intimate relationship of a child growing up in the family, like we did, naturally it's going to play out even more and when we get married and have our own kids. So keep that in mind. Dissociation is very real. It's where a person, mind and body disconnect. It's a way that the person is coping through some of their childhood wounds that they don't know how to process through, or maybe don't have anybody else modeling through. So they're pretty numb. They zone out. These could be adults that just go through the motions of life, but they never really feel fully present. Nothing really, you know, maybe the smile of a kid, or I don't know, horizon, you know, the sun coming up or sunset, whatever. It just doesn't get in here. You know, a child who can't physically escape stress either sometimes learns to mentally escape it. This is where I believe, from what I'm learning, this is where a lot of problematic mental behaviors can start to play out. So, again, keep it in mind, I believe at the cellar, the bottom of all the issues we have for many people, especially when it comes to alcohol abuse and addiction, is complex trauma. And, when stressful patterns like this happen repeatedly throughout childhood, that's where complex trauma can develop. So, 5 out of 10 times a kid going down a slide and a parent not grabbing them the other half of the time might produce complex trauma in that child. Again, depending on how often that happens. So sometimes it's years of emotional neglect, criticism. So you were criticized in your house more than you were praised. That can lead to trauma, believe it or not. And if anybody else is like me out there, it's like, wow, like you should be, as a child, hearing more praise than criticism. And it's not to say that we're not trying to push our children to do better, to work harder. Again, but that's when all you hear is you need to do better. You should be working harder. You can get a better grade. In a parent's mind, they're doing their job. They're trying to get the best out of you. Again, depending on your kid, where they're at, they're little kids. They're not picking up on the adult life lesson that we are trying to teach in those moments. And believe it or not, there's potential there for trauma to be happening. Unpredictability. Will my parent be there at the bottom of the slide? Can create a lot of fear. Never feeling emotionally safe. So these are big ones. So how does this show up? A child that goes through this as a young one, as an adult, they might always feel rushed as an adult. They can't slow down. They have an inability to slow down and relax. It's not, their nervous system won't allow them to do it. They're constantly stressed. Even when things seem to be pretty mellow, their mind and body attaches to something stressful. These are people that might need noise all the time. Background music, loud music, headphones in all the time. Headphones, I don't know if you call them that anymore. Earbuds, whatever, whatever. TV on at night, things like that. So some adults know how to rest and to slow down because their body learned safety. They have that possibly secure attachment, which helps. I'm going to go into the I part of P.I.E.R.S, the intellectual needs. A child should have received encouragement, guidance. Curiosity should have been encouraged, right? Don't do this. Don't do that. Be careful of this. You know what's going to happen if you do this? Kids should be encouraged to explore with safety parameters in mind, but parents should be taking a step back from their fear. Again, this is why it's so important. Parents do their own healing work because we are sabotaging sometimes our children's curiosity as young kids by hearing, don't do this, don't do that. Emotional intelligence, right? A child should have a parent who has emotional awareness, has some form of emotional intelligence, and healthy teaching, right? Parents are models for their kids. Our kids are going to grow up and remember so much less of what we say. They're just absorbing everything of how we're living. Some children learned thinking was safer than feeling. And as adults, what does this look like? What patterns do I look for when I come across clients to help them trace it back when I start to understand this stuff about them? They're overthinking. These are people that live in their minds. They're intellectualizers. They stay up here. These are podcast listeners, right? Readers, people that just, take another class, get another certification. Nothing wrong with any of that. But it's because they have a hard time dropping down into what's going on in here. These people tend to overly explain as adults, and they need certainty in life, right? And because of that need of certainty, they tend to control. A lot of people become thinkers because thinking felt a lot safer than feeling in their childhood home. This can look like replaying conversations that you had in your head, trying to logically solve emotional problems, really. We don't drop in here. So I help clients learn to start feeling what's going on inside of them, as that's going to speak volumes as to sometimes what we need. Now, I help clients see this, right? We're connecting how we're functioning as an adult to what's going on underneath the surface. You could be 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, and you're still functioning from these childhood wounds where your needs weren't met. And you're still acting it out in your adult life. So my job is to help you start to become aware. So the next one is E, all right, our emotional needs. Listen to this part twice if you need to. And this is where I get a lot of pushback from people, and this is where their eyes start to open. My parents are good people. I wasn't physically, abused. We had food on the table. We took nice vacations. I had great education. Maybe their physical and intellectual needs were pretty consistently met. All right, so emotional needs. A child should have received through all their developmental years validation, empathy, comfort. Now, think of those three. Validation, empathy, comfort. When your child is angry, when your child is crying, when your child is fearful about something and you don't agree with it. Let's say you think that your child is too old to be scared of the dark. Or your child is scared of insects or bees, and you think it's ridiculous. And so you don't validate their feeling. You don't empathize with them. And you don't comfort them in those moments. Think of a child having a temper tantrum. How many adults sit back and say, wow, temper tantrums are normal? They are. Kids don't know how to articulate what's going on with them. I'm a parent. I've been through a ton of tantrums. They're extremely difficult to navigate, even when you're healing. Even when you're somebody doing this work, tantrums can be hard. Now imagine having no idea what I'm talking about or doing any of this work over the years. A tantrum spirals parents. They can't handle a tantrum. They don't know how to step in. So because of that, that child doesn't build emotional safety. These kids hear more often than not, like, you're okay. It's not a big deal. Parents don't have to scream and yell. It doesn't have to be chaos all the time in the house for there to be neglect. These are parents that don't know how to step into their kids' emotional world because they don't know how to step into their own. And so when their kids have big feelings, the parents don't know how to deal with it. And so they just say, like, the things that sound good. Don't worry about it. You're going to get over this, right? There's an emotional neglect that could be happening there. So if emotions were not safe having growing up, why would your system learn how to feel whatever it is you're feeling now? So emotional neglect really impacts us as adults. That's why we all have a hard time, especially in marriages, when you need some form of vulnerability. You should be sharing what's happening inside, right? You and your spouse are on the same team. You're trying to raise kids and build this life. You need to understand what's going on with each other. So if emotions were neglected on a consistent basis, it can lead to complex trauma. So what does this look like as an adult now? So some of your adult patterns that I see when you come in here is you emotionally shut down. You ain't got time to get involved in some form of conversation if it's getting a little too emotional. So you shut it down, or you put it back on the other person as, them being too sensitive. You explode with your reactions. There's no managing your anger. You are a pretty angry person. And you either take all of that anger and you keep it in here, or you take it out on others. You avoid vulnerability as an adult. And this happens all the time with married couples. They have a really hard time being vulnerable with each other because both people don't realize that they have these insecure attachments and they're both living out of their survival systems. Believe me, it's not going to go anywhere. You're waiting for your spouse to trigger you, and your spouse is waiting for you to trigger them. That's it. There's no vulnerability. There's no, connection. There's no deeper understanding the spouse. It's like, no, my parts are up in arms, right? I'm on edge. I got to figure out what's about to go down. And the spouse is doing the same thing. So difficulty expressing feelings is another big one. If you never felt safe as a kid expressing feelings, then you don't learn to safely express them with an adult. And this is a double whammy one, because most of the times with emotional neglect, we don't really know what we need. And so we go out and we pick people in our lives who are going to emotionally neglect us. It's the reality of it. Many of us have no idea we're doing this. In fact, me saying this, you're probably like, that's ridiculous. I wouldn't pick somebody. But the only way you can tell is by talking with somebody who can help you through it, or reflecting on where you're at in your own life right now. But being able to express what you feel with people safe is going to be challenging, because with emotional neglect comes picking people who are going to disrupt our nervous system and usually not really be in tune with their own emotions either. So we're not going to feel safe wanting to express what's going on with us. Sometimes reactions happen so fast within us before our mind, right, the logical part of our brain has any type of chance to figure something out for us. Our nervous system right here, we are already activated. A lot of adults know what they think. And I hear people think, all I do is hear thoughts. Tons and tons of thoughts and opinions and stories. And little about what they feel. Relational needs, the R in my P.I.E.R.S framework. A child should have received connection, consistency, affection, belonging, healthy attachment, and healthy conflict modeled. That's why in a lot of the parenting talks I do, and I'm giving one coming up this Thursday at the Mount Kisco Library, I also post them on my YouTube channel, From Survival to Partnership, if you want to go check them out. It's about connecting with our children first. Many of us don't do that because it didn't happen for us. We go into teaching, explaining, punishing, disciplining. We do that right off the bat. There's no time for emotional understanding and building that connection first. And that connection first is going to change everything. I don't say that. Those aren't just my words. I've studied that, and I've also experienced it in my own life. When me and my wife are connected, our conversations go completely differently than if we're both in our survival parts. My son tends to listen a lot better when we are connecting with him first. So why parents push back on that is because it doesn't make sense to them. They were never taught it. They might not believe in it. They think children should behave a certain way and they're going to enforce that. And I agree. But you got to connect with your kid first. That's why so many kids grow up and just disrespect their parents. They don't listen to their parents. They might not listen to people at school. And it's unfortunate. I always feel for kids. I really do feel for kids because the adult always looks at the kid as the problem. And I don't view it that way. I see a kid who hasn't been connected to, who hasn't been emotionally validated, comforted, whose needs weren't being met. And so whatever age this kid is acting out on, that's what we see on the surface. And we think, oh man, this kid's got to see a therapist. This kid right here, they're going down a bad path. This kid needs medication. And I find any of those choices to be very unfortunate. I think as parents that we can learn for our kids' sake on how to connect. I don't do this perfectly. I'm sharing what I'm learning with you. My kid could do something today where I don't connect with him at all and I go right into teaching or punish mode, right? Almost out of a default. So believe me when I share this stuff, not out of judgment. Consistency. Again, how did your parents show up on a consistent basis in your life? How did you see them show up with each other? Did you see affection in the family? Was that modeled? Were parents allowed to be themselves? You know, what I've come across a lot is one parent dominated the emotional arena. The other parent either had to fight back in survival mode or they flighted. and they just shut down parts of themselves and never expressed what really bothered them, especially about their spouse. Spouses should feel comfortable enough going to their spouse and saying, this is what's bothering me about you. Not in a resentful, angry, manipulative way. In a way of saying, hey, I want to connect with you. I want to get on the same team. But right now, there's some needs of mine not being met. And there's some things and behaviors that you're doing that we need to discuss. I need to see some change. And it works both ways. I mean, that's as real as it gets right there. When you start having conversations like that, when your spouse can sit you down and hold you accountable, and then you got to start living it out and start showing your spouse you mean business. Yeah, the kid gloves are off when you're doing this type of work, that's for sure. There's no running. Belonging. It's our job as parents to make sure a kid feels like they belong in the family. And it's unfortunate because many parents will say some pretty harsh things. I should have never had you, right? You're ruining us. Kids ruin everything. Very resentful towards children because of our own selfish and narcissistic ways, possibly. We want life to be about us. We want life to remain the way we want life. Maybe it's our own inner child that still doesn't feel they're capable of the responsibility of raising a child, and it's just triggering so much. And once again, instead of dealing with it internally, we'll put it on a child. You did this. You're creating this. And believe me when I tell you, children are going to feel that anyway because they're in survival mode. Children can't bear to accept how unhealthy their parents are. Not when they 100% depend on those parents. So children need to do a pretty remarkable thing to survive. And it's to make it about themselves. Mom and dad are arguing a lot because of me. Mom and dad are getting divorced or got divorced because, right? And they'll start believing things about themselves that may not be true. Healthy attachment. This is the secure attachment. And healthy conflict modeled. So I hear both ends of this. Oh man, my parents, they should have got divorced. They were just so toxic and volatile. Now, I don't agree with that. I think that things can be worked out if at least one person in the marriage is willing to put in significant inner work. It just might open the eyes of their spouse and their family can be saved in a way. I'm not saying that that's the case for everybody. Obviously, some people's lives are in danger in their marriage, and they do need to get out. But some people will say that they didn't learn conflict resolution because their parents were just always at each other's throat. So chaos and arguments and all that stuff, maybe parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, whatever it is, everybody's fighting, and that's just the way, in your mind, that's the normal way things worked out. And then you have the flip side where people are shocked, right? Because they'll say, I don't know, my parents were really good people. And they've been married 50, 60 years. And I don't really remember them really arguing. And, that's something I have a hard time believing in. Because if both people in a marriage are being very real with themselves, they're going to have conflict. It's just, there's no getting around. No getting around that. So, in one way, conflict is avoided, and in another way, conflict is embraced, just not dealt with in the healthiest way. And so, yeah, if that's not getting modeled, then your relationships as you get older, you're going to fall into these patterns yourself. So you might even look back on people that have been in your life, and maybe you see where they were all about conflict and chaos. Or maybe they were all about just nothing about themselves, not having a true self. They were just in it to meet your needs. Right? How do I serve you? What's best for you? And while some people will be like, well, how could you say that? My parents didn't argue. Because we can break it down, and what it might sound is a very codependent relationship. So I think when parents never argue and parents argue all the time, those are two unhealthy ways that parents are trying to manage. And because of all that, children have to adapt. They have to adapt to everything there. And so they could become adults with survival patterns where they people please. It's best if I just be nice. If I don't have a personality, then you can't attack me. If I meet your needs all the time, then I'm safe. You'll like me. Right? I'm fitting into the crowd. I'm not trying to stand out. I mean, the truth is most of us are followers. I know many times we'll try to tell our kids, be a leader, but most of us are followers. We want to belong and fit in. And if that need wasn't met as a child, then we're going to have ways as an adult to try to figure that out. You might have a fear of rejection, so you're going to people please. You don't want to be turned away because it just hurts you too much when that happened or if it happens. So you tend to cling to people in your life. You become very clingy. Again, the fear is just running through your insecure attachment. And so you cling to someone because that's your way of getting your nervous system calm. The problem is it can push people away that feel clinged to, controlled, especially if they don't understand this. The opposite, because we do run in extremes a lot of times, is isolation. So you don't cling to people, you don't deal with people. You don't have best friends. Even if you did, you make sure to see them once in a long while. You're not bringing anybody into your world. All your conversations are purely surface level. They ain't going anywhere. And that's just the way, even on an emotional level, that you can just isolate yourself. Conflict avoidance, again, this insecure attachment style. You have fear there. You avoid conflict. I literally was talking about this with my wife yesterday. This was part of my core wounding here. And it created a lot of wounds within her. Because I hold things in. Because I don't want there to be conflict. I fear conflict with her. I don't want her to get upset. And in my mind, right, the rationale is I'm doing what I think is best, not realizing that it's something deeper within me that is still plaguing me. I just don't know. Right? Why am I so scared to bring something up? That's inner child work right there. That's finding out where that fear came from. Especially if you have a spouse that is trying to make you feel safe. You still might fall into an avoidance style. Although doing this work is going to help. and you're going to feel that safety from your spouse. I know I started to feel that over the past couple of years with my wife. A little more and a little more each time we dive into these deep layers of our relationship. That fear of vulnerability starts to kind of go away a little bit. Because so much of me, I'm putting in my wife's hands, right, with that vulnerability. And I'm praying to God, right, that she doesn't spiral me back into a trauma response or trigger me in some way, and vice versa, right? She's putting her vulnerability into my hands, hoping that I'm emotionally mature enough, right, to see her for where she's at, empathize. Again, going back to what I talked about with a kid, right? Empathize, comfort. Same deal. If we didn't get that stuff as children, you're not going to be able to do it with your spouse. And it goes a long way inside the relationship. That's where marriage is deepened. That's where you want, when you talk about having a happier marriage, this is the hard work that goes into getting to that happier place. And it's not to say you're happy every day, all day. It ain't like that. You're still doing this inner work. Hopefully, seasons still happen in marriage, and life still happens. But it's nice to know that your spouse has your back, not just physically or financially, but emotionally. That you feel safe enough to say, "Hey, this is where I'm screwing up. This is what I need help with." And to have a spouse be able to accept that without judgment, without attacking you, without blaming you, without, belittling you. It's a big deal. But again, that's that secure attachment. And many people I come across, they're not sitting in the secure attachment. They're just not. They're very fearful. And so they hold a lot within themselves. I've learned something. I had a good therapist friend of mine say to me that a lot of relationship struggles are really attachment struggles. And I love that. Especially the more I started to get into this, attachment trauma is like, man, it's that powerful stuff. Because it really does open your eyes to, it shifts you from blaming all the time and you start looking at yourself more and more of like, wow, it's my attachment style. Where did that come from? How is that attachment style built? What's the work do I need to do in order to heal and get better? And that conflict avoidance too, I want to go back to that for a second, because of my attachment style creates a lot of fear in my wife, a lot of anxiety in her, And here I am, I could be getting triggered by that. Meanwhile, I'm the one participating in her fear and in her anxiety. Not realizing it because I'm in survival mode. I don't know any of this. So, yeah. And then be careful not to run into conflict, because that's your bread and butter. You just love conflict, and you could be addicted to excitement, and that just gives you that adrenaline rush that, you've just been really needing. And you're somebody that, loves to go toe to toe with people. Gotta be mindful of that. You might need some help, to be honest with you, in that area. I think there's a way that we can have conflict and hear each other out. So what does this look like? Relational neglect, relationship wounds from childhood. How does this play out as an adult? I hit on a lot of it, but needing reassurance, right? You're always approval seeking. You might not be asking, but you're looking for someone to say, hey, good job. Hey, thanks for doing that, by the way. right? You're craving that, right? It's such a deep need that you never got before. And so you're putting it on your spouse to meet that need, which in a healthy marriage, right, we're getting away from that 100% dependency. As a child, many of us get stuck in a codependent stage we live with for many, many years without getting this help. But the healthier version is interdependency, where, we can co-regulate sometimes together. If I'm having a rough day, my wife can help me soothe and calm down, and vice versa. And also, we can learn to reparent ourselves and meet our own needs, but it's still very nice when our spouse can step in and help us out. We'll stay in unhealthy relationships. So we'll stay in a relationship even though we're not getting anything we need out of it, because we have no idea what we need, or we're too fearful to say anything. We struggle to trust. You could be married 10, 50 years and really struggle to trust your spouse. Fearing people are going to pull away. Again, that goes back to core wounds of ours. Abandonment is the one thing that pops in my mind. Again, fear of rejection is another core wound. We're terrified of people doing this to us. Feeling deeply hurt by small moments of disconnection with your spouse can set you off. If a child grows up emotionally unseen, which many adults have, they may become an adult constantly seeking validation, always looking for that outside approval, needing the outside to let our insides know that we're doing good, we're loved, we're respected. Some people will use their shame and how they feel on the inside and these unmet needs to propel them into some great success stories. Some of the most successful people out there, right? Think about social media influencers or Hollywood artists, professional athletes, whatever it is. These people are famous and they're well known. They're household names of people that never even met them. They're rich. They're powerful. And they are struggling in their own home. These could even be men that are tough, right? They can destroy an enemy. They could destroy another team. And many times it gets praised and applauded, and okay, I'm all right with that. But they can also destroy love and connection in their own home. I heard a friend of mine say one time that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And I do believe that we can be both. I think that we can tap into our strength and our courage and our curiosity and who we are in here. And still be able to show up in our home with some vulnerability, with some honesty. Especially for men. I think our children need a man who can provide and protect. But not just that. Because while some are just into the provide and protect, we also could be emotionally neglecting our own children and not helping our children build that secure attachment. So we need both. The last one is the S in P.I.E.R.S. Stands for spiritual needs. So a child, in your childhood, you should have received meaning, hope, purpose, a sense of identity, values, and healthy spirituality. Now, over the years, we've learned a lot about religious abuse and spiritual abuse, and it's very real. And it's happened, and it's happening, And it's something to be acknowledged, that people can use God to intimidate, to strike fear in people. And that's not what it's for. Meaning, again, if you have good parents, good teachers in your life, and they're on a certain path, they're going to help you figure out who you are. But many of us don't know who we are because our parents didn't know who they were, and their parents didn't really know who they were. And many times in our childhood, because out of survival mode, we had to shut down a lot of those parts of us. That's why healing is magnificent and it's beautiful. It's painful and it hurts, but people start tapping into parts of themselves that they're like, I knew I liked to do that as a kid, but I my dad would always make fun of it, or my mom, never took the time to invest, learning about it with me. And so I just weren't getting some needs met. So I just stopped doing it. I pushed that part of me far away. But now as an adult with reparenting and inner child and parts work, these adults I'm watching are stepping into being who they are, who they're meant to be in life. I mean, this is what I'm doing right now, doing this stuff. I shared this before. I never thought in a million years I would be doing public speaking or speaking on any of this stuff, ever. Actually, don't put me in front of two people to speak, unless there's alcohol involved. And then, that could take some of my worries away. But no, I'm tapping into stuff within me that is coming alive. And I'm 47 years old next month, and I'm feeling more and more aligned with who I was meant to be than ever before. So it's a great way to live. If these spiritual needs were not addressed on a consistent basis, a child grows up to become an adult with emptiness, another core wound of hopelessness. They might even have identity confusion, and I get this a lot from adults. They really, really are not sure what they should be doing with their life, with their marriage, just where they're at. They also carry a lot of shame and feeling lost, just lost in life. My mother-in-law would use a term that I still use today, and she would say a wandering soul. And that hit me. There's so much truth. There's so many wandering souls out there. And what does this look like in adult life? As an adult, you constantly are chasing fulfillment, usually outside of yourself, right? The fast cars, the nice cars, the money, whatever. But you're just trying that hole in the soul, I've heard people in recovery say. Success, and it looks good on the outside, but there's still something not quite right. You're still acting out of these behaviors that are problematic. Always looking for the next thing. Nothing is ever good enough. And as soon as you get what you think you need, you move on to something else. Again, it's these unmet needs are still inside of you. We think that if we move on to the next thing, that's going to heal us. And that's not the healing work. You feel disconnected from yourself. When your spiritual needs are not met on a consistent basis throughout your childhood, you really do disconnect from yourself and from God. And yes, I use the word God, and I'm going to share a little bit about my own spiritual journey. I did not start this journey out with a belief in God. In fact, I had a lot of resistance. I had my own questions. I had a little bit of pushback on this whole God talk. So I share that for anybody who's might cringe at that word. And also everybody's in a different place in their journey. I'm just sharing from my experience now. But pain was great enough. And I've heard this, the gift of desperation, G-O-D. When the pain gets great enough, you'll do almost whatever it takes. And somebody told me to start praying. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. Praying. I got to start praying every day. Like that's going to help alleviate the rage, my alcohol abuse, all these other, my financial problem, all these other issues I have in life. Like that's going to change everything. So I was very much into that. But you know what? I also knew what it was like to live the other way. So I'm like, all right, I'll pray. But it was half-hearted prayers. My heart was not into it. I was reading words while I was eating breakfast, and then I was out the door. And then as years went on, I just kept doing it. And I started to really believe in prayer. And my heart was invested in my prayer life. And so it became a sacrifice sometimes that I had to make throughout my day, where I had to make sure I was carving enough time in for my prayer life. And not like the rushed prayer, which sometimes, I would get caught up in. But to spend some reflection time in prayer. And my relationship with God grew, and my faith in God grew. And then years and years, over a decade later, I went to Catholic school as a kid and all that stuff. And, going back into the Catholic Church and my Catholicism, my faith of my childhood, again, over a decade, I started to open the door into that very slowly. Still happening to this day. But that door is opening, and I'm feeling more and more connected as well there in that area. So for me, personally, God became a huge part of my healing. So what does healing look like? I really explained some of it here in the video. But healing is just becoming aware that these needs of ours weren't met, and that they, carry these consequences within us. We don't just grow up and become an adult and just get over it. Healing is also reparenting through inner child and parts work. That's my main focus in what I use to help people heal, so that we can start meeting our own needs on our own in healthier ways. And awareness is definitely the beginning of that. Now, this is hard work because for many of us, again, we're carrying these childhood wounds in. So a lot of people never learned how to speak up for what they need. In fact, it carries a lot of terror in their system. And I mean terror. To speak up and share what they need from someone. So it's best to do this in a safe place, with someone you trust, with somebody who can handle this type of work, which again is why I think it aligns so much with who I am and where I'm at in my own healing journey. So I think boundaries, we've heard so much talk about boundaries and boundaries this and boundaries that, and boundaries are great. And I've read a ton of boundaries books. Intellectually, good stuff. Having to apply it in life is it's the real test. Again, depending on where you're at in your journey, this boundaries are what everyone talks about, and they're great. But your system might not be ready to set boundaries. And I can help you see where your system is kind of holding you back or sabotaging you in any way. Boundaries are basically, it's going within here and learning what we will tolerate and what we won't tolerate. Right? We are learning how people should treat you and how they should not treat you. And you're going to start stepping into that. And, boundaries are about ourselves. A lot of times we might think boundaries are about what we put on other people. I'm setting a boundary on you. That's not Boundaries are more about actually us and taking responsibility on our end. And a lot of people struggle with boundaries because deep down they don't feel worthy. They don't feel they have the right to be setting a boundary. They have that inner critic that plays in their mind. So if you grew up afraid of rejection or abandonment and setting boundaries, I mean, these core wounds, man, they dictate our lives today. These beliefs we have about ourselves, they're not going to allow you to start setting boundaries out of nowhere. You're really going to have to we got to start small here. And it's a practice. And we have to work on setting boundaries because, when your system is anticipating somebody getting upset or angry, again, it goes back to these other needs I talked about, then you're not just going to start running out there trying to set boundaries with your spouse, and it just doesn't work that way. So in closing here, now that it's 2:00, a lot of healing is relearning safety in our own system, connection, emotional honesty, vulnerability, self-worth, and boundaries. So I'm going to stay on for a couple of minutes in case anybody has any questions or anything like that. All right, I am going to sign off. Just remember that the goal in any of this healing work in your healing journey is never about perfection. That's not what we're doing here. The goal is really, at the beginning, it's awareness of like, oh, wow, I had no idea I'm in survival mode. I had no idea I had these patterns within me. I just thought that's just the way I was. I thought I was more angry at my spouse or at my kids or at my job. I didn't realize that it has a lot to do with me being fearful.